Okay, so now in this video, we are gonna look at this scatter plot that we made in the last video, and we're actually gonna like extrapolate some from it. Essentially, what we're going to be doing is we're gonna be using sort of the trend of the data. And when I create this trend in this data, you can see what I've done. I've drawn a straight line through the data. I have picked some points on here that generally fit with the trend of the data. I have points that are below this line. I have points that are above the line, and I have sort of created a line that trends with it. Now, your line that you create or whatever, if you ever created what's called a trend line, something like this, could be slightly different. That's because you'll have a slightly different view of the data than I did, and that's okay. We actually have computer technology or calculator technology, which we'll play around when we do our project later this week and into next week, where we can actually find what's called the line of regression, which is truly a calculator-based or a calculated line that goes through the points as accurately as we possibly can. And it essentially takes an algorithm and finds the average of every single point and creates a trend and creates an equation of a line and then plots it in your data. So that way you can sort of see the most accurate line that you possibly can. So I've done one by hand. It's not perfect. I have not done any of those calculations. Instead, I've just looked at the data and said, okay, this data point seems pretty sort of in the middle of everything. And this point, if I were to connect these two dots together, they kind of follow the general trend of the data. And I'm not shifting it up too high, and I don't feel like I'm shifting it down too low. It feels like it's going through the bulk of everything. This particular line, what I can now do with it is I can now sort of make some predictions. If I had someone, I'm going to bring this a little closer. If I had someone, for example, with a stride length, so we're looking at these numbers over here versus and with a stride length of say like 150 centimeters. So somebody who's taking really big steps in comparison to what we actually plotted, because these people have stride lengths in the 120s. If we had someone who's taking a stride in 150, I could potentially take this line and extend it out and find how tall that person is in general. If I look at this trend line that I created is about 20, like for every height that we are plotting down here, the corresponding stride length is about 25 units below. So if I had someone, for example, who is 150 centimeters when they took a stride, we could say, well, if I added 25 units to that, because that's what this line is generally following, if we added 25 units to 150, we'd say that that person's probably 175 centimeters tall. On the same hand, if we had someone who had a 90 centimeter stride length, so someone who is substantially shorter in stride, so if we were to uncrunch this scrunch that we did over here, we would say 90 plus 25 gets me 115 centimeters. And so we'd have somebody who's about 115 centimeters would be generally following this trend in the data. As well, somebody who's 110 meters in terms of their stride length, we'd add 25 to that and we get 135. So this person is probably they're pretty close to where this data actually falls, or just barely off the graph. Either way, using this trend line, I can make some predictions. I could also say somebody who is, for example, 148 inches tall or centimeters tall, they roughly have a stride length of 122 to 123 centimeters based on this data that we have here, okay? I could also go up a little bit higher and say somebody who is 155 centimeters tall, they are roughly going to have a stride of 130 centimeters and so on, just based on this trend line. So these trend lines, as long as I'm careful with how I've created it and that I'm trying to have a decent amount of data above and below, I'm trying to go through at least ideally I'm going through at least 2 of these points when I'm creating my personal trend line. You won't necessarily see that on a computer generated one, but since I'm going through about 2 points, I can feel fairly confident that this is a pretty good representation of this data, and I can use this to predict other people's heights and or stride lengths. So thank you for watching this video. We're going to look at one more video after this and look at height versus arm span data. And we'll look at how a computer generated trend line would look or my personal trend line would look in comparison to someone else's. Sorry, my son is making some funny noises in the background. But we'll do one more video after this, and then you can start working on your must-do practice problems. Thank you for watching. Bye.